Hello, planet Earth. I'm Abel Zyl. I am the founder of Zyl Vardos, a tiny house building company in Olympia, Washington, USA. And I am taking part in this event today. I'm very excited about this. I'm going to talk to you guys about using curves in architecture, specifically as it relates to tiny houses. First off, I wanted to say that I hope you all are well. It's a crazy time, and I think all our lives are impacted really intensely by what's going on right now with coronavirus. But fortunately, we have these ways of talking to each other from a great distance, and here I am, and here you are. So I wanted to, just before I get into talking, I want to wish you health and the wherewithal to keep your loved ones safe through all this. It's a lot to deal with. And I know some places are hit a lot harder than West Coast US, where I am. It's fairly low key out here, but still we're completely shut down as far as normal infrastructure goes. So I'll get on with it. I think I wanted to start this talk about building with curves, about using curves in architecture with a little bit of backstory. And it's, as I was exposed to building from a very early age, I never really let go of my childhood fantasy of building a house that was like the ones you might see in fairy tale books. I guess, I just wasn't into the blockiness of Legos and cubic things. I always wanted it to be something more. But I didn't get a chance to actually build a house until I was about 12. And that's when my parents decided to build a house from scratch together. It was rather large, which is kind of odd considering that they didn't have a lot of money. But they did it all with their own hands, so that's kind of how they pulled it off. It was like a 4,500 square foot house, which was funny because I would never consider building something of that scale unless I was trying to house like 3 families. But nonetheless, they did a lot of family entertaining there, so it kind of made sense at the time. My dad always welcomed me into the building process and handed me tools, and so I kind of was there all the way along through that thing. And it was a big project. It went on for like 10, 12 years, I believe. It was kind of one of those never quite finished projects. But in a way, it made it all the more kind of charming and quaint, including my mom's ongoing grumpiness about the unfinished parts of the house. But so it goes. Anyway, when I wasn't working on the house with my dad, I always had access to all of his tools and kind of an endless supply of scrap. So I built things. I built a variety of things. I built like speaker boxes for a while. I was a little fascinated with like making loudspeakers. But as I grew up, I continued building, and my dreams of building like the houses that you might see in fairy tales faded away a little bit and were replaced by simpler concept, simpler forms. And those came straight from the natural world around me. Because really, nature is the cleverest architect. Nature, I'm using nature as kind of a general, it's a personification, of course, but it refers to the way the whole planet kind of organizes itself with living things, and not non-living things for that matter. But the forms that are generated in nature are kind of infinitely functional, as well as being extremely beautiful. And you kind of all know what I mean. If you look at a flower or a tree or a river or even the arrangement of rocks on a beach or something. It has a kind of a primal, simple usefulness to it, and that's really meaningful, I think. And we can, return to that as builders and humans, and that's something that I've kind of always, it's kind of grown into me as I grew up as a builder. So I have a few notes here. This is kind of keeping me going. Please feel free to ask me questions along the way. Oh, and here they are. So sorry, I haven't been seeing them. Tilt your camera up. Thank you. This is. Yeah, I don't know if this chair gets. Oh, it does. Okay, I can do both, camera and chair. Just for reference, I had the chance to sit in a build that I just recently completed and delivered to a client. This is a Mura 24. I'm not going to give a walking tour of it because of the streaming app runs on a desktop-sized computer today, but I'm working on a video tour for you guys soon. So this is called the Mura 24. It's an evolution of the shorter Mura that I did about a year and a half ago, I think. So anyway, this is all you get to see for the moment. If you have questions about it, maybe I can answer those at the end. I'm going to stay to the talk itself. So anyway, back to the natural influence to form and shape. It kind of happened for me, even though I had television and video games as a kid, and really when I was a kid I'm getting a little on in the years, and when I was a kid was the 80s. So video games for me was literally an Atari, or I had a Commodore 64 for many years, if you guys know what those are. I loved that thing, by the way. But I didn't spend a terrible lot of time indoors with that stuff. I vastly preferred climbing trees and making mud dams and creeks, or just sitting in the grass kind of watching what's going on around me. I do remember spending a lot of time doing that. I lived in a place where I fortunately had some space beyond my parents' house where I could roam around, and I roamed very far. I don't know if my parents really understood how far I went. I went 8 miles in every direction on my bike once I figured out how useful a bike was. So anyway, in doing all that wandering around, I built a jillion forts of all different natural materials. I can't recall all of them even, but I was always building forts, some with my friends and some alone. But we used whatever was at hand, rocks, woven sticks, weaving sticks together. But when you do that, you kind of have to follow the form of nature a little bit, or a lot, to make something functional. So anyway, I'm going to check the questions really quick. Yeah, I'm glad that. Pong. My best friend in early childhood had a Pong game. Her dad was into the classics, so yes, I did also play Pong, but I did not have one myself. Last question on the list. Do you live in a tiny house on wheels? By Brandy. The answer to that is yes, I currently do. And that's a more recent change in my life. I am living in a small tiny house at my shop in preparation to build myself a new one that's roomy enough to fit me and my 9-year-old daughter. She takes up a little bit of room. So I'm working on my own tiny house in the fall. Not right now. I have a couple tiny houses on my docket that I have to finish up. So, but that's coming. And I'm really actually very excited to design my own house, because it's really rare that I get to keep my own work. I do all this work and I put this blood, sweat, and tears and kind of thoughts into the building, and then I send it off to the people who've hired me to do that, which is, kind of what you do when you're a builder and you make your living doing that. But it kind of hurts a little bit every time that I send a house off. So I'm going to go onward, and I'll come back to some of the questions in just a little bit. So just to finish up the backstory and how I got into tiny house building, I jumped forward a couple decades, and I found myself sitting at a table with a woman by the name of Kira, who was a friend of a friend, and she was interested in having me build her something. And I showed her a sketch of a really zany little tiny house, and actually kind of looked, I'll just show you the sketch pad with me. I just had like scribbled this thing out, and I was like, well, what do you think of this sketch? This is going to be very undetailed. That was the shape. Anyway, it had a lot more detail than that. It had like a chimney and the wheels on the bottom because it was meant to be a tiny house. And she said, yes, please, can you do that for me? I'll hire you to do that. And I was a little taken aback that she said yes to something so wacky, but I agreed. And that kind of began my process or my journey, not process. It is a process, but it began my journey of building tiny houses. So then, through the trust of a lot of wonderful folks and encouragement, I've been able to build in this way that's pretty unusual as tiny houses on wheels go. But that's why I'm talking about curves in architecture today, because I want to share a little bit of that and hopefully infuse those of you who aren't sure how to go about incorporating that with a little bit of knowledge or resources that might carry you forward or allow you to include that. Of course, it's easy for me to say, if you want to do something, just do it. Don't let other people tell you not to. But I know there are limitations with things, including building with curves. So why not build square? Building with what is typical in the building industry is rather blocky, and it takes less time. And if you go to the lumber yard or the hardware store, building materials tend to come in squares and rectangles, and they fit together more or less. So we also have all these established codes and practices that define, structural rules for things that are largely square. And whenever you start working to step outside of that, it's definitely possible. You've seen other, especially when you're in a big city, there's bound to be some unusual things, but those are kind of like big ticket, art skyscrapers or something, you know what I mean? And we don't even have as many of them in the US as you might see in like Singapore or something, Hong Kong, places that are a little more out there architecturally. And somebody's going to say, well, what about the, I know how this goes, but so you don't have to be very inventive to build square. And there's certainly a time and a place to be efficient and resourceful. And the building industry is also commercialized. So it's driven in that way to build things that are profitable for the companies that are building. And more, there's kind of large conglomerated, it's very corporate, entities building lots of houses, and they tend to repeat designs to make it more profitable. It's a business, as people say, but there's more shades of it's a business. And really, I believe it's more relative, or it's more relevant to where we are, even at the moment, with what's going on and what this is shaking up. Like coronavirus is shaking up our reality. Like, what do things really cost? What do they really mean to us? So it again becomes relevant to look at, the art and the function that are in our architecture, and also minimizing what we actually need, because there's a lot of belt tightening going on right now. And so, why not? So then why build with curves? You might ask. There's a bunch of reasons that curves are important. Besides the fact that somebody will think that it looks beautiful or clever or whatever, that's part of the point, but that's just the surface of what it's actually communicating. Curves in architecture actually are kind of a gift to us, because structurally they allow loads in the building to be really smoothly distributed. So if you think about an egg or the shape of a tree is kind of straight, but there is like a diminishing of it as it goes upward. There's a lot of strength in that non-linear, non-blockiness. There's a reason for that. And again, it has to do with kind of smoothing out how loads are distributed, where they end up. I won't go too much into that sort of engineering, but it's kind of a beautiful side effect of building curved houses. The more curved the roof line is, and the more of the house that has curves in it, the stiffer it gets. Not stiff, but strong. It just becomes very strong. And thus you can make it a little bit lighter even. It's kind of like a bottomless pit of engineering. But, I think it's worth it. But again, I'll admit that it's not easy. And there are a lot of builders and building companies that wouldn't tackle it in the way that I perhaps have. But yeah. Okay. Pamela, Pamela says, Roman arches and domes allowed interior spaces never seen before. That's exactly it. They were building with heavy, stiff materials like stone, rocks. And by creating these very particular curves, they've created structures that have lived for thousands of years. Just incredible, and definitely not something to ignore in the art of designing something. I'll answer a couple of questions because they have to do with curves here. Perry says, do you have to do a lot of steam bending? And the answer is no. Although I know how to do steam bending and I've been around boat building, it's a little time consuming, and it can be, it's like an inexact science. Well, building's not an exact science, but it's having something happen approximately the same way each time is kind of important to doing the process in a way that is predictable enough that you as a builder don't go broke trying to build something for somebody. So I don't tend to do much steam bending. Very occasionally I do. I use a computer and I design in the three-dimensional world, and then I cut pieces out, and I use a CNC router, actually. So there's kind of a technical side of all this natural building that I'm doing. But I don't see it as really separate. It's just a newer tool to do something that, humans have already known how to do for a while. It just makes it a little bit faster, and it allows you to do some things that you wouldn't be able to do by hand. I like that. But I still do things in traditional. It's like I have a weird mix of traditional and modern techniques, or I should say, current techniques in my work. Okay, lots of questions about CNC. I will save that until later, or you can email me and I'll let you know. But I don't want to get too into like tool details. It's not fancy CNC. I guess it was a kit which made by my friend in North Bend, and it's been a fantastic machine. And I got to learn a lot about it by basically building it out myself. But it's not what do you call it, a woodcrafter style. It is actually professional level as far as the amount of torque it creates. Okay, I won't go on to details. I can go crazy about that all day. I love to talk about tools and science and weird stuff like that. I'm also trying really hard not to. They requested that I don't use profanity, and I'm like, damn. I in all of my life, I tend to use it as a coloration. So I'll stop every once in a while, so I don't have to say one of the choice words that I think is just a colorful descriptor for human life. Everybody, my grandma would disagree with me a little bit, but I teach my kids not to maybe talk like that to their teachers, but you know what they do when they run out and play together alone. Okay, I see your comments. It's true. But by no means am I like a total like bottom of the bucket sailor as far as talking like that goes. But again, it's color, and I don't want to omit too much color from my life. So let's get back to it. Curves and using them in architecture, aside from the strength element, humans themselves aren't square. So it makes sense. We are part of the natural world, whether you agree or disagree. We're a very strange part of the natural world, but we think about ourselves maybe a little too much. But it is what it is. Just trying to kind of not overthink being part of the natural world and kind of moving forward and doing what we can do in a relatively, beautiful, simple way is important. So why would you want to invest in this more difficult form of architecture? Why not take an easier path? It also, I believe, comes down to the value of artistry, however you think about that, in things that humans create. Some of the most timeless and useful human creations do have elegant, fluid, curved designs. One that I can think of would be the Volkswagen Beetle. That's a car that had they're still out there driving around, but it had 60-year lifespan more. I don't know if they still make them. Somebody probably knows this, but the Volkswagen Beetle is not square by any stretch of the imagination, and it's a pretty timeless design and did the job it was supposed to do very well, which is a kind of an affordable, charming little metal pod that you could hop in and get from one place to another. And a few other examples that I have, and I don't have them. Well, I have one to show you. Would be musical instruments, which don't really work too well if they're super square. Here's a mandolin that is built with curved pieces of wood, and it is. I can't believe this thing is in tune. It's been sitting on my shelf. I'm not really a mandolin player these days. But the curves not only make it comfortable to hold on to, but they change the tonal characteristics of it. I think the most famous curved wood instrument would probably be a violin, because there were some very clever people that experimented and figured out how to make a wooden box that emphasized the sounds that were very important. So let's go on. I see that time is ticking very fast for me, and I wish I could stay on for a lot longer. Yes, I see the comment right there. Somebody's asking my website. I'm going to do that right at the end. Hopefully I can hang out and answer questions. But a few other things that are shaped in curvilinear ways are a bicycle. Some bicycles have beautiful curves, and they're made to fit the body. A wine glass is very curved. There are incredible wooden chairs. There are still some really amazing makers of those out there. Those are very curved and, again, made to fit the human body. Spoons and forks are typically rather shapely because they have a particular... my coffee mug is not straight, but some of them are kind of blocky. So, so I'm guessing that some of the folks listening to this are intending to be do-it-yourself builders. And I just wanted to reassure you by saying I'm also a do-it-yourself builder. There's no difference to me just because I've done quite a large number of houses, and you. We can all take up a project and build it with a little help from our friends, to quote a famous song. But to integrate curves into your building project, I think the easiest way to do that is to begin by drawing it with your own hands, because humans have a hard time doing it. I brought kind of a really lo-fi setup for drawing for you. I'm going to flip this over, but so I'm going to draw this upside down because I'm used to drawing, for right side up for me, but I'll flip it over so you can see. But say I was going to draw a tiny house. One thing to think about is to draw small. If you draw small, it's easy to focus on the overall form. Here, I'm just drawing the basics of a side view of a tiny house. Again, you don't have to go at it this particular way. But when you're small on the paper, you can kind of, really quickly cut to the chase and experiment. Whereas if you try to take in too much information at once, you'll focus on details. I'm just talking to kind of the general person. There's definitely some folks that I'm just going to copy kind of one of my other shapes here. That's a window, right? It looks kind of like a badge from Star Trek. This is a door, so let's and say that window shape is kind of something you're interested in. You could, so I try to reflect shapes around the house. You could make, another kind of a picture window. That's kind of big though, so let's divide that into a couple parts. I always do these weird dividers, and then sometimes I never do those because they end up getting really costly, but you get the idea. And then say you want a dormer on top of this. Let's kind of, draw a roof. Let's make it look a little bit like a house. I'm just showing you how quick it is to sketch something out when you're working small. I'm not worrying too much about details, really. I know that rafters themselves have a bit of a shape. It's really, maybe this has a little trim piece that crosses over. See what I mean? It's not so bad. And so some of you don't tend to pick up pencils and pens, and that's okay. I'm really overdoing it with these windows. This is why I started building windows for myself, because I couldn't reliably find the shapes that I wanted to. Here, we'll put some tires on this baby because, well, it's a tiny house on wheels, but they don't have to have fender. There's ways to get around having it be too trailery. Maybe the roof extends out here. I'll put that same shape on the other end. Okay, let's call that good because I know time is limited, and maybe it has a wood stove because people think wood stoves are charming, and there's a reason for that. They're cozy. Okay. That's it. That's all it takes is just getting pencil and paper. Again, when you really get to building, you're going to find out you may have some limits because if you go really crazy with form, maybe you have the time and money or both to really take that idea to its limit, but really that's kind of all it is. If you're not if you're not comfortable with drawing the curves yourself, the other way that I do this, or I recommend doing this, is to find, and again, I wish I had some examples, find online some pictures of things and keep it limited, like pictures of like 6 natural objects that inspire you. And it could be as simple as, I'm going to pull up a couple here, saying, I'm really going with the natural things. You could use something else as an influence. No, I don't want that. I want a lily. I'm looking for flowers because they're beautiful. Okay, so you might say to yourself, I want something in my house that is, influenced by that form. So you'll probably end up with a bunch. So making scrapbook boards is easy to do with the internet. I really appreciate that for like all forms of like image / information research, but image research specifically. But make yourself a board, but then trim it down to like 5 or 6 different things. And you can use that to influence your design, even if you don't sit down with paper and pencil and churn out a drawing just like that. But try to draw. Why not? You've got nothing to lose. And don't beat up on yourself if it doesn't come out the way you want. Because I often, for some reason, I was in the mood today to draw relatively straight lines, but sometimes they kind of come out like this, squiggly, shaky thing, and I just let it be that because why not? Again, the final project will go through layers of refinement, but you can literally, if you're building a house for yourself, and that's really kind of what we're talking about here with tiny houses. If you're building a house for yourself, you can save those, you can pick and choose a few details, but you can say, I really want it to have this thing going on and figure that out. And that's much more accessible when you're building a small house, like a tiny house. Those unusual details are so much more accessible to you than if you're building a 2,500 square foot house, where if you're really wanting to go crazy with form, you may be spending $1 million or something. Really. And there's not a whole lot of places that people build huge house structures in a really unusual way. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. And if it doesn't kick me off, then I'm going to answer questions for a little bit. But again, don't be shy to put some of that into your project. There's shaped windows you can get out there. And there's a bunch of other ways. And I'd love to do a follow-up to this where I actually talk about how to get the details into a house. But it's not, I don't have enough time for it today. So you guys, build with curves. It's exceptionally rewarding. Building a house that you are excited about artistically and architecturally makes it a more timeless object, something you'll keep with you for a longer amount of time. It won't be like anything in the world. And there's something undefinable about that value, I think. It's kind of worth it to, pull for to take the not easy road. Above all, just be real, be true to yourself, and have fun while you're doing it. Building is actually fun and a lot of work, but it's actually really fun. Anyway, much magic to you all, and sending out my love across the world. Stay healthy, be good to each other. I'll see you all again soon. So I'm cutting to questions. If it's not kicking me off, I'm done with my presentation formally. So here we go. Pamela asks if I've done a barrel vault roof. Yes, I do an arch structure. It's not built in the barrel style. Like, I don't use longitudinal structural members as it would in the kind of old, Craftsman and previous style barrel vault, because they were decking with different materials. But yes, I can do that sort of thing. Actually, with my setup, I can build graduated curves, so curves that change as they go. And this structure that I'm sitting in is a really great example. You can't see it very well from here, but the roof line changes in slope as it goes along the length of the house. But again, I'll have pictures of this up really soon. I think there's a couple pictures on my Instagram, which is at Zyl Vardos. Very simple. So, reading questions, thinking about what I might make for dinner. Seashells. Lots of people are saying seashells. Seashells are a really incredible natural form. They come in all different shapes and sizes. There is actually a builder, he's Spanish, I believe, and I don't know his name off the top of my head, but he's done a couple kind of notable seashell-esque large structures. They're very incredible, like very one of a kind in the world. They're probably done with like concrete on a mesh sort of. So it's like sky's the limit when you're building concrete on steel mesh. That's, you see these like weird cave houses. It's beautiful. Susan asks, are those cedar shingles you use on your tiny homes? Yes, I use all kinds of cedar. It is my favorite exterior building material, and that's because cedar is lightweight, is resistant to rot, and is available here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm guessing you guys are still seeing me, but I don't have an exact indication. Gaudi is similar to this person that I was talking about earlier. Anyway, back to cedar. I do use a lot of sawn shingles. I recently did this house actually has a shake roof, which are splits. They're larger. They're 24 inches long. And the only thing I want to say about cedar while I'm talking about it, because I love it as an exterior material, it's something that is kind of the region that I live in. It's a common building material because we have cedar, but we used to have vast cedar forests, old growth cedar, which they're pretty much gone. So our cedar's coming from Canada. Cedar's not regrowing as fast as it's being used currently. So I see that as kind of a heads up. Like, yeah, it's still available on the building materials market, but we're going to have to switch up pretty soon. There are other things you can use. Some of the, they're not quite as charming and natural, but some of the like concrete, wood fiber, like hardy products are very reliable and pretty easy to use. And I think those, those are already being used on a lot of structures around here because they're a little more, they're probably more sustainable in the long run. Wood is a sustainable thing, but we have to find the closed circle where we're regrowing it as fast as we're using it, especially that we're not using old growth anymore. It's hard because I see old growth in like a pile of framing lumber, and I'll pick them out and use old growth lumber just because it's there. And I know some other builder will come along, pick it up, chop it up, and frame it into a wall. It's very sad, but anyway, what is it's a renewable resource, but we have to be careful with it, just like everything else pretty much around us. So Perry asks, how do you make your windows? My shaped windows are what I'm going to talk about. And there's a round behind me. I'll show you it opens. I redesigned these just a little while ago, but this opens up. The new design of that window, which I call the round tip out, is I'm really happy about how it turned out. But I make my round windows. I do use my CNC router a lot because I can design them and get the specifications exact on the computer. And again, it's not separate from an older craft. I can literally draw a shape. I'm drawing a shape, so I can show you. Like, I can draw a shape. Didn't really rush that one, but and then I can actually take a photo of this and put it into the 3D drafting program and draft over it, exactly. Then I can get it to the specs that it needs to be an operable window. And then what I do is I send a pattern for the glass to a local glass maker. I'm not a glass maker. I can cut glass, but I don't. I want my houses to have the insulative value that people expect in a modern world, and so I order low E insulated glass units to whichever shape I specify from local glass company in Tacoma. Tacoma Glass is what they're called. But most glass manufacturers will do patterns, and they cost a little bit more, but it's kind of worth it for what I'm doing. Okay. Todd asks, do you typically start with the inspired form, then apply the function? And the answer is yes, mostly. But sometimes you bounce back and forth. You start with a function that you want to accomplish, and you'll draw something that you want. You want to make it interesting, so you draw that. So you go function to artistic, back to function again. I guess at some point those two become meshed, and that's what you want when you're doing architecture. And there's lots of that is a concept in architecture, is how to mesh like form and function so that they work together. So yeah, mostly shape first, and then I finish out the design. The designs can take a really long time because I integrate the engineering as part of the drawing the whole thing out. And so by the time something's done, it's got like hundreds or thousands of parts. It's basically like a mechanical engineering process, and it might be 400 hours later of work that I have a complete house. I draft all that in the 3D world. I'm going backwards. So I'm going to the older questions. Perry asks, any resources for building with curves? And off the top of my head, I don't know of any, but I'll think some up. There's some really good kind of basic architecture books. I came at this from a boat building perspective, which is something I studied for some time in college, and did some work in the boat world. But I was simultaneously building, houses, and I was kind of doing kitchens and furniture back then. Anyway, I don't have any off the top of my head, but the techniques to build with curves are a little harder. You have to reach a little farther out to find them into the building world. Again, YouTube's this like incredible kind of, mind-numbingly diverse library of how-to videos on things. But I don't know if I would totally recommend or disrecommend going searching on YouTube for a video of how to do something curve, because you'll find a little bit of everything. So people are asking, a couple of people asked about my website. My website is www.zylvardos, that's ZYL, V as in Victor, ARDOS.com. People always bring up hobbits with me, which is interesting because I just want to say something about hobbits. I've never looked at that artwork, because that's what it is. The Hobbit house is pretty related to the movies of that J.R. Tolkien trilogy of great associative, affinity. So I've never really looked to Hobbit for, I think the fact that I do rounds, people automatically think Hobbit. But I can appreciate the immense quality that a fairy tale has in our consciousness. There's no reason why we shouldn't kind of incorporate that magic into our lives and our houses and our forks and our handwritings or whatever. You know what I mean? Why should they be just the bare minimum? Maybe it does create a new kind of a fairy tale for you if it's got a little bit of quirkiness to it. Okay, looking for more questions. Terry asks, how much time do you spend on your builds? It's really variable. It depends on how much detail is in the structure and how many windows it has. But I don't also rush them. I work a lot. I don't rush things around the shop. I work with a very limited group of people, people I trust and that we kind of enjoy working together. Right now, under coronavirus, I have one carpenter I'm working with because we feel comfortable being in proximity to each other. I'm still working, fortunately. I'm thankful for that. A lot of people are shut down. It's been difficult. There have been other little complications to doing business in this current time, but I have some really good people I have worked with in the past as well, building tiny houses. So builds take, it's variable. I want to say 4 months or more, but it really just depends on what else is going on around the shop and how complex the build is. So if I was to do one all by myself from start to finish, it might take 6 months. If it was of the complexity of something like this. But again, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't try to pin it down too hard, because what is more important to me at the end is that it's done correctly, if that makes sense. That it's functionally right, as well as, meshing with the person who I've built it for. I know it's kind of unusual in this day and age, but I think that's pretty much it, you guys. So I am, for a second time, going to say, fare thee well. And one more question that popped up. People are still asking questions. That's great. What is the short, wide, corrugated roofing on the Moondragon? I've used that on a number of my houses. It's Onduvia, or Onduvilla, however you want to say it, in the US of A. And it's kind of this lightweight, it's kind of an asphalt recycled fiber composite, but it's really cool. They're a really cool company that is founded in France, the Onduline company. And the Onduvia, I like it because it has a lot of texture, but it's also a roof that is adapted to being used on curves. It's not made for that, but it works because it's a shingle type roofing. So that's certain kinds of roofing work, including I hand fabricate steel panels to fit together onto a curved roof. So I make my own roofing sometimes. And I'm doing that for the next house that I'm working on right now. I'm doing my hand fabricated steel, which is kind of fun. I like doing metal work in addition to wood. So I got another request for website address. I'm going to rattle it off once more. I'm even going to write it down as I say that. So it is www.zylvardos.com. It's backwards for me, so maybe it is for you too. Well, then I can fix that. I can write it the other way too. It'll take me just a couple seconds longer. My brain has to work out this backwards thing. There we go. Calm. Okay, there you go. Both ways. You see it now. www.zylvardos.com or www.zylvardos.com is my website. I have information about the builds that I currently offer and what booking is looking like, and also a bunch of photographs of stuff that I've done already, and links to the videos. So thanks, you guys, and really excited that I got to be part of this thing. We'll see you around.